insult people, to spread lies, to distort, to threaten people, and then they'll say, "Oh, it's freedom of speech." Well, your freedom of speech stops at some point where, actually several points, and that's a really tricky thing to define. Where the boundary actually exists. But what I said to friends of mine at the gym a few days ago about Facebook is, and actually about Twitter as well, is it's not really in their interest to protect people's privacy, because one of the business models they have is to try and, especially the controversial things, will get them more attention. When it comes to exposing photos that people think are private, this to them is a feature, because it means more people will go there to try and find something they're not supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said earlier on, in regards to privacy, freedom of speech, the freedom of speech is a very difficult line, or a difficult subject to tackle, because you either have it or you don't. Now, if we go for a society or an environment, say Facebook or any social networking site where you have complete free speech, you will always get a minority that will abuse that position. You will get the trolls that we see very often. And it's not just myself and yourself that get these trolls. It can be for any reason. And some people are professional just disruptors. And so it's very difficult to say when free speech should stop. Because if we stop people making derogatory remarks towards us, for example, and say, no, that's not acceptable, but everything else is, then we're sort of defeating the object of free speech as well. On the other side of that, there is a line, and there is a line of decency, which I think everybody, or 99.9% of people have. And again, I don't like seeing that crossed. I take great exception to a lot of the insulting remarks that may be directed towards people that are reading my site, or maybe just derogatory remarks that generally aimed at people, and to try and cheapen them. And so it is a very difficult subject. I don't think there's any answer. I think what I've always said, what I've tried to promote is that, yes, I agree with free speech, but then I also agree with taking 100% responsibility for your own actions. If I make a comment towards somebody else, then I take responsibility for that comment. There was a very interesting series on the radio today. There was a chat about this very subject, and people were phoning in to say how it was unenforceable, how we couldn't monitor or to censor, for want of a better word, people's speech on sites like Facebook purely because of the size and the contentious nature of censoring or stopping free speech. But I think there should be more onus put on people like Facebook. If people are going to be making money out of a social networking site, then the onus should be put on them to help regulate when there are problems. I'm not saying censor everything because you mentioned a certain word, but if a complaint is received, I think the onus should be put squarely on the owner of the site, and they're encouraged to act very quickly and very decisively to tackle all these sort of grievances. So a lot of the arguments we get are, and a lot of the insults I get are very silly, and really it'd be rather petty of me to ask for every single one of them to be removed or to block users from certain sites, and I wouldn't do that. But there is a line. I think everybody knows where that line is, the line where an insult becomes indecent or obscene or grossly insulting. So, but it is, I mean,
dangerous in some cases.
Yes.
But I should point out, though, one of the differences here is that you have 3 parties instead of 2 parties, because one person operates a platform, which puts this platform under some pressure it has nothing in some sense to do with. You have the offending party, you have the offended party, and you also have the one in between. That's basically the wedge, which is hosting that. Of course, it's a tricky one. And it happens also in YouTube, or not just in YouTube, in all kinds of places in the web. It might be even the web host. When a person commits an act of copyright infringement, and somebody files a DMCA, then it puts pressure on the ISP or the host to do something about it as well. And then you have pressure on a party that has basically done nothing wrong, and is trying to protect the customer, or a bunch of customers, perhaps also the people viewing the material. And it's always a very tricky thing for Facebook. You have to distinguish between the interests of Facebook protecting the user and the interests of Facebook defending the company and the profit motive, basically. So here you have censorship possibly coming from the complaining side, saying I've been offended, or somebody is defaming my company, or somebody is defaming people I represent. And then there is the interests of Facebook, saying, well, this is not good for the site to have. This is a very insulting things for us to host, and it's just going to cause us lots of trouble, maybe even legal trouble. And again, this is why I don't really trust all these centralized sites like Facebook in general to do people's social lives, because the control then is in the hands of one single master that has some agenda or has some interests or has some pressure from one certain government, from one certain bunch of senators, so they will not be adjusted so well to a global population of users.
I mean, I have to give Mark Zuckerberg credit, because obviously he's developed a social networking site which we can't argue is horrendously or hideously popular. I mean, there's no doubt on the success that his creation has achieved.
I would distinguish between, again, it's like the operating system. There is a difference between popular and widely used, because a lot of people use Facebook even though they don't like the company, because everyone's there. The same applies to Skype, and the same applies sometimes to users of Windows. They don't actually like Windows. It gives them like blue screens of death, but they are in a position where they use it because it's really hard to use something else.
I mean, I personally, I've always found Facebook rather distasteful. I don't like the way that people blindly jump in feet first and display all their personal details and air their dirty linen in public on this Facebook site. But more than that, it's Facebook for me, when I've had occasion to read conversations and the wall and people's profiles, and it tends to be a lot of just meaningless discussion about trying to get the better of your friends on your colleagues on the Facebook site. And it's a very dangerous site, because a lot of people mix their working life and their private life together in one big Facebook site. Yeah. So of course, where one person may behave one way at work and another way at home, you've now got to mingle both home life and work life, and it takes away those boundaries. And I think I've always been a strong advocate of your work life's one side of your life and your home life is another, and you keep the two very separate.
Yeah, to be truthful though, it does happen in all sorts of sites and in all sorts of activities. I had a chat today about actually with people I know from the gym again. Lots of us are actually on Twitter, and we kind of subscribe to each other. But then I speak to people about technology and things like that, and jokes, and maybe sometimes might be a bit offensive to some people. And I have to bear in mind that even like my bosses might view this type of stuff. And it's hard to think of like when you speak to a crowd or you speak to in a certain place, you can think of who you're speaking to. When you have people from many different areas listening to you at the same time, there is this kind of conflict. And I know some colleagues of mine who would watch the accounts of clients of ours, basically, and they would know people inside the company because they are following them on Twitter. And some of those people will talk about like NWO and kind of like taking pictures of their fingernails and stuff. And then you hear what they think about these people, and they think of the company in terms of the people. And this is a you have to start thinking very generally of everything you post publicly on the internet is something that can be viewed by just about every single person. And I think there is a certain tolerance too, because a lot of people, including those at the should I say top positions, they do find that the internet is going to mention their names, and not always in a very flattering way. And they will know that people should not take everything seriously, actually look at the sources and who's saying what exactly. And also, when it comes to them posting something about their personal lives, it's becoming easier for them to kind of accept, okay, well, I don't have my privacy anymore, and that's the whole kind of different discussion we could have. And then they will tolerate their employees doing the same type of thing, because they'll say, well, basically I know for myself that I could, have my personal life exposed to the internet. And they will say, well, I can accept that and I can tolerate this because I know it's really hard not to do that.
It's funny, we've been talking about censorship and free speech, and already we've established that when sites like Facebook incorporate people's private life and work life together, as you said when you're saying about certain banter that you may have with people, you've got to be aware of your boss, or one of your employers being privy to that discussion, we've sort of engaged in our own self-censorship on the basis of that. Yeah. And it is quite a fascinating topic. I mean, the reason why I brought up Mark Zuckerberg's comments was because at the G8 he made a remark in regards to freedoms and Facebook and freedom of speech. And from the reports I've read, he seems to imply that the uprisings in some of the troubled countries that we've seen in the news recently were made possible or assisted by Facebook and sites like Facebook. And I find that rather distasteful to suggest that you have nations that are rising up against tyranny and foul play on the basis of a social networking site. I mean, certainly
there is some truth to that. I mean, WikiLeaks and the press and everything else.
Yeah, certainly.
It was in fact used, so I wouldn't.
But it's not one particular. I mean, they would have found another medium if there was another social network site. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just something that Facebook created. So and I think it was a little bit. It didn't sit very well out with me because it sort of cheapened the efforts and the sacrifice that these people in these troubled countries are making in order to enforce change.
Yeah.
And
I think this is a case of. Well, actually, I don't think we covered this before, but if you look at the history of Facebook and how this guy basically started some of his program, and he was taking profiles which he wasn't supposed to use, and trying to do games with people's public profiles at the university, and he was put before a disciplinary committee at some stage for abusing people's privacy, basically. So this is a site that basically grew out of trying to harvest people's information, maybe even using phantom ones to create some so-called content for the site. So here we have this site that managed to grow from way back in the days. I remember when it used to be very small, but it managed to grow because of the network effect, because people wanted to find their friends. They would just go to the same network. And of course, one of the reasons for a lawsuit against Facebook is because the company which could become today's Facebook, which hired Zuckerberg to do work for them, there is a story, of course, how he kind of like misused the code and used it to his own advantage and wasn't sticking to the contract. They could possibly be in the same situation where they would be the de facto place to create a profile in. But he was pretty lucky. So Facebook didn't do anything innovative. Actually, sites like Facebook, if you look at things like Classmates and all kinds of sites which were supposed to unify people's profiles and identities, probably just didn't give as much away, like photos and all kinds of like so-called wall. And I'm not sure even why they call it wall. It actually implies you're blocking people out for some reason, but which is the opposite usually of what you do in Facebook. It's more like a intrusion vector of sorts into coming to my life, read my wall, say, if you look at the history, you know what Zuckerberg said about his users, those who trust him. He called them dumb fucks. That's his words. People who trust him on the side, because he was basically reviewing people's data. You shouldn't really trust him, but a case of success just due to the fact that he was growing the fastest. We have lots of you can compare things like CMSs and web server software, operating systems, and watch how the ones that manages to grow fastest at some stage gets the critical mass, and then from there it's just even Twitter is an example. The Linux distributions has some examples like that. Apache, he managed to be just the person who was there at the right time, the way I see it, and wasn't actually inventing anything and he wasn't even the first either. He was just the one, I think, giving a lot of information away and managing to keep people around the site. So,
yeah. Well, what we'll do to sort of round this Facebook topic up, because I've got another little article that I just wanted to briefly mention. I only want to briefly mention it because I don't think it should deserve much time at all. Mail Online is writing an article about Mark Zuckerberg, and it's claiming that the founder of Facebook says he will fight to allow under 13s to use a social networking website, despite warnings it would put the most vulnerable children at risk. Well, before you give your views on it, Roy, I'll give mine as a parent, and I'll tell Mark Zuckerberg there is no chance in hell that my children are going to be going onto Facebook until they're of a far older age than 13. I don't think it's a particularly good site. I don't think it's a safe environment. I haven't been convinced when I've seen people make complaints about inappropriate behaviour. I haven't been convinced at the speed in which these disputes are resolved, and I certainly don't want Mark fighting for my rights for my kids to go on his site. I don't know if you have any sort of view on this, Roy.
No, I think that's just. I actually wrote to the person who helps Nelly Cruz in the European Union today because he's following me and he keeps track of that. And they were wondering about the issue of privacy in Europe. You probably know they're more strict than the United States when it comes to privacy in all sorts of ways, and I could give examples, but this is one of those things you have to carefully consider because Facebook has got its own interests, and they will have very good lobbying efforts. We previously spoke about the fact they hired a firm to smear Google. And as you know, Facebook is partly owned by Microsoft, and lots of people don't know that. This is why they help Microsoft in all sorts of ways, but the issue of bringing... Okay, let's just assume that we're not talking about a 13-year-old. We're talking about something the average, say, 10 years old, 8 years old, so that's the 13 is the threshold. So he wants people to kind of sign up their kids so they can mark them as friends, whatever. I'm a friend of my 5-year-old, and I don't really know what are they supposed to do? Like put up the weird sentences they'll kind of regret putting there, like in a few years from now. And I don't even think it had so much value, and I think. Well, from the point of view of freedom, I suppose that they should be allowed to do that. And I know some bloggers are extremely young and doing extremely well, writing about things like Linux. But I'm trying to find a difference between all of these different sites, and I think lots of parents are especially afraid because they're not so used to having so much information about their family on the site. And I know people would be like CEOs of companies, and all of a sudden they find their kids, doing funny things on the site and thinking it could be used against me. And that's one of the reasons people don't like Facebook either, is the fact that they find themselves losing a separation between work and family life and things like that. In terms of protecting children, I mean, I suppose you should be more concerned about pedophile who might be somewhere in some playground.
It's not just one particular fear. It's the whole the innocence of young children and being exposed to the world of Facebook. And I think the charity Kidscape summed up my views on it quite well. This is a child protection charity, and they said the more adult world of Facebook would lead to a greater number of being at risk of cyberbullying and other online dangers. And I think that sums it up perfectly, because there's not just obviously the stuff we see in the news. You've also got just the exposure to an adult environment where they could read something which is an adult conversation, even if it's done legitimately between two adults.
But I will kind of play the devil's advocate. Well, if you consider Facebook to be the devil, I suppose I'll play devil's advocate. But the fact is, this is just the digitization of things that already exist in some sense. I mean, kids can find some magazines of their, adult magazines somewhere. They could be exposed to a person who's insulting them in public, or, like I said before, they could go to a playground where there's going to be some sex predator. Another person is doing it online, and maybe it's actually going to be easier to catch these people online based on profiling or whatever. So I'm trying to think of...
You see, the difference being... I mean, the difference being, I would hope this is true. It's certainly been true in my experience. If you walk down the street and there's a young child around, and you have two people maybe using adult language between themselves, if they see a young child, they may well keep quiet or hush the language a little bit. On the online world, you've got the mask of being anonymous, and it gives people a lot more scope if they are so inclined, or even if they're not even aware, just to speak to another person who they believe maybe is to say an adult and say something inappropriate. And this is the worry, and this is why, as a parent, I'm not having people like Mark telling me or trying to encourage me to put my kids on to this type of site. It's my first job. I know I champion freedom of speech, but my first job is to look after the safety of my kids. I'll worry about free speech when they're a little bit older, and they're obviously mature enough to go on these sites.
You have to define safety, though.
Safety.
I'm trying to be I'm trying not to be a hypocrite here, because I do advocate freedom of people of all ages in general, and I'm thinking about this word protection, which is always misused in some ways to actually means to protect. Sometimes it means to protect somebody else. You pretend that you protect the children when actually you say protect the children. You mean something like protect your interest in some cases.
Well, safety, it's quite. I find it quite easy to find safety. For example,